Back in 1989, Britain's then ambassador to Tunisia, Stephen Day, received a call from his American counterpart, Robert Pelletreau. As Day recalled to me, he was somewhat surprised to be asked, "Do you have Yasser Arafat's telephone number?" This was the moment that the United States determined it would publicly engage with the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, which it had labeled as a terrorist group for years. I was reminded of this when learning about one of the most stunning moves in the first 50 days of this Trump administration, just days after President Donald Trump unveiled his plan to ethnically cleanse Gaza, emptying it of its Palestinian population. US officials were engaging in talks with Hamas in Doha. Where was the shock? This went largely unnoticed, with its implications in ripping up decades of settled US policy. What could this all mean? It could be very profound. It has been a sacred tenet of US policy never to talk at any time with Hamas, which it designated a terrorist group back in 1997, well before most European states followed up with it. It was a career-ending move to even call to talk to Hamas. The mantra has been that the US does not negotiate with terrorists. Now, leaving aside the thorny question of who is a terrorist, this has been more honoured in the breach than the observance. Regarding groups, though, that confront Israel, the US tends to insist and adhere rigidly on this boycott. But this all ended in Doha last month as US hostage negotiator Adam Boehler engaged with Hamas. These talks were not indirect nor mediated through third parties, but face to face. In addition to a prisoner exchange, Boehler said that Hamas had offered a 5 to 10 year ceasefire, highlighting that Hamas talks were hardly limited in scope. The Israeli leadership is seething, fearing a separate US policy on Hamas. The Trump administration doesn't do apologies. So when Boehler was interviewed on CNN, he pushed back. "We're not an agent of Israel." Israeli leaders might wish to consider their own history. Former Prime Ministers Menachem Begin and Yitzhak Shamir were both designated terrorists by the British for mass atrocity attacks, but this did not stop Britain and other states from engaging with them when in office. Netanyahu has been given a timely reminder that Trump is supportive of Israel, but by no means beholden to it. Trump's agenda is America first, or more accurately, Trump first. Lazy analysis has often portrayed Trump as a pro-Israeli come-what-may type, very much in the mold of his predecessor, Joe Biden. Though Trump greenlights Israel's decimation of Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank, he is far more capable than Biden of acting against Israeli wishes if it suits him. Israeli leaders will be fretting about what Trump may do next. Will he agree to a deal with Hamas without their consent? Will he kickstart talks with Tehran without their agreement? For all the criticism leveled at Trump, he deserves some credit for making this move. It's one of the smartest ones by a US administration in ages, although one has to remember there are caveats as to what might happen here. Trump wants to make deals. You cannot do this by banning contact with one of the parties to a conflict. So who would Trump not talk to? Negotiating with Hamas suggests he may also talk to Hezbollah or the Houthis if he feels that the circumstances demand it. Trump has indicated that talking to Iran, despite his maximum pressure policy, is not off the table. And who can forget Trump's first term, when he shifted from calling North Korean leader Kim Jong-un Little Rocket Man and threatening to totally destroy North Korea, to pursuing one of the most unlikeliest of bromances. Trump told one of his rallies, "We fell in love." What are Washington's traditional allies to make of all of this? Countries such as Germany, France, and the UK have steered well clear of contact with Hamas, adhering to the so-called Quartet principles, which stipulate no contact with the group until it renounces violence, recognizes Israel, and abides by all previous peace deals. Notably, Israel has not renounced violence and has in fact escalated this to genocide in Gaza. It not only rejects previous agreements like the Oslo Accords, but undermines them and opposes any move towards a Palestinian state. Trump's moves will be welcomed in some quarters. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer appointed Jonathan Powell as his national security advisor last November. After his time as former Prime Minister Tony Blair's chief of staff, Powell wrote a book called Talking to Terrorists: How to End Armed Conflicts, in which he even posited the idea that there could be talks with the Islamic State group, and that shouldn't be ruled out. Powell's key argument is that all too often other states waste huge amounts of blood, treasure and time in avoiding talking to such groups, but always ends up doing so eventually. Can this approach work in the Middle East? Excluding Hamas has hardly reaped any obvious benefits. One argument is that talking to groups like Hamas give them undeserved credibility. This might be the case if you invite them to the White House or Downing Street, but less so when they are meeting envoys away from the cameras behind closed doors. Another argument is that by rewarding violence, it may encourage more. But talking should not be seen as a reward. Engaging Hamas does not equal an endorsement of their actions or views. It is just a clear-eyed assessment that talking, even between the most hostile of enemies, can yield some positive results and unlock unforeseen possibilities. History shows that Trump is for once spot on. As former Labour leader Hugh Gateskill once said, all terrorists at the invitation of the government end up with drinks in the Dorchester. Updated to 2025, it may just be the Trump Tower and not a Park Lane hotel.